Welcome to swords and hammers. Truth comes clothed in tales, and the soul remembers what the mind alone forgets. The world is loud, but for the next few minutes, it can wait. Take a moment, settle yourself, listen well. Come, let us begin. The Man Who Was a Graveyard. There are places in the world that are wrong, places where the sky is a different color, where the wind speaks in a forgotten tongue, and the very soil seems soured by a sorrow older than memory. The coast of the Gerasenes was such a place. Fishermen from the other side of the sea, the clean side, would speak of it in whispers. They said the cliffs there looked like broken teeth in a skull, and that the sun always seemed to be dying when it touched those shores. The land had a sickness, and that sickness had a name. They did not call him a man anymore. He was the darkness that haunted the high country, the reason children were barred in their homes after dusk. He was the thing that screamed from the tombs. Some said he had been a good man once, with a wife and a trade. None could remember for sure. His story had been eaten by what he had become, a living desecration. He wore no clothes, for his shame had been burned out of him. He lived in the rock-hewn sepulchres, for the company of the dead was preferable to the terror of the living. His skin was a road map of his own madness, a lattice of old scars cross-hatched with new wounds, for his own hands were his most constant tormentors. He would sit for hours, gashing his flesh with sharp stones, as if trying to let out the choir of shrieking voices that had made a cathedral of his bones. The people of the town had tried to help, at first. Their help was made of iron. They came with shackles and chains, not to heal him, but to make his madness predictable, to cage the horror so they could ignore it. But the thing inside him loved a joke. It would let them bind him, let them feel the cold satisfaction of their civic duty, and then, with a laugh that wasn't human, it would grant him a monstrous strength. The chains would snap like thread, the shackles would shatter like clay, and he would be free again, free to be the perfect and absolute slave of the ruin that possessed him. His was a freedom that was a more perfect cage than any iron could forge. So they left him to his kingdom of death, a king of a graveyard, ruling over nothing but his own decay. Into this blighted country, a boat came ashore. It carried 12 tired men and one who was asleep. They had just passed through a tempest on the water, a rage of wind and wave that had made seasoned sailors cry out for their lives. The sleeping man had awoken and spoken to the storm as a man might speak to a barking dog, and the sea had fallen silent at his feet. Now he stepped onto the shore of the Gerasenes, leaving one great calm behind him to confront a storm of a far more ancient and terrible kind. The thing in the tombs saw him. It was drawn to him, and it hated him for it. It ran, a twitching, scarred horror, not to attack him, but as a moth runs to the candle flame that will be its undoing. The man's legs carried him, but the legion inside him screamed at every step. He fell in the dirt before the stranger, a heap of trembling misery. And from that heap, a voice tore its way out, a voice scraped raw with 1,000 other voices. "What have you to do with me? Jesus, Son of the Most High God," it shrieked. It was a sound of pure, metaphysical agony. "I adjure you by God, do not torment me." The demons, who knew his name when his own disciples were still wondering, preached a perfect sermon of terror. They who tormented a man beyond endurance were now undone by the mere presence of the Holy One, terrified of a torment to come. In the face of this spitting, writhing fury, The stranger was the calmest thing in that whole, wrong land. He looked upon the ruin of a man and spoke, his voice not loud but heavy, with the weight of creation. He asked a question that was not for information, but for reclamation. "What is your name?" It was an act of war, that question. It was the rightful king demanding the name of the squatter lord who had seized his property. For a moment, a flicker of the original man seemed to surface. A single, broken word, "My." Then the voice shattered. It fractured into a chorus of whispers, hisses, and growls that seemed to come from all around, a sound of dry leaves skittering across a tombstone. "Name is Legion," the voices hissed as one. "For we are many." The man was no longer a person. He was a crowd. He was an occupied city. He was a graveyard. The 1,000 voices that lived in the man were now reduced to a single, pathetic act: begging. They knew their judge. They begged not to be sent into the abyss, that lightless prison they dreaded more than anything. They were parasites, terrified of being without a host to defile. Their gaze fell upon a great herd of swine feeding on the hillside, 2,000 unclean beasts. "Send us to the pigs," they pleaded. "Let us enter them." The Lord looked at them, his eyes holding a sorrow and a severity they could not comprehend, and with a voice that could calm a sea or condemn a soul, he gave them what they asked for. "Go." It was not a shout. It was a release. It was a key turning in a lock, and the world tore open. A wave of invisible force swept from the man up the hillside. The swineherd, which had been grunting and rooting in the mud, was seized by a single, unified madness. 2,000 heads lifted at once. 2,000 pairs of eyes went white with a terror not of this world. And then they ran. It was a stampede of pure destruction, a river of flesh pouring headlong down the steep bank, a cascade of bodies and squeals of panic that ended in the grey, silent water of the sea. And then, silence. A silence more shocking than the screams. The air, which had been thick with malice, was suddenly clean. The wind felt like it could breathe again. On the shore, the man who had been a graveyard was perfectly still. He was sitting at the feet of the teacher. The keepers of the pigs, their minds reeling, fled to the town, babbling of what they had seen. Soon a crowd came out, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. They came to see the monster, but the monster was gone. What they saw shocked them more than any naked, shrieking madman ever could. They saw the man they had known only as a wild beast, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. It was the third part that terrified them the most. His eyes were clear. The frantic, hunted look was gone. He was sane. The restless energy that had driven him through the mountains night and day was gone, replaced by a profound peace. He was at rest, submitted to the one who had mastered him. His shame was covered. His dignity, which had been stolen from him, was restored. The townspeople looked from the quiet man to the teacher. Then they looked to the sea, where the last ripples were fading over the place where their wealth, their livelihood, their 2,000 pigs had vanished. They did the math in their heads. They looked at a restored human soul, a man given back his name and his mind, and they counted the cost, and they decided it was too high. They had been comfortable with the devil they knew. He was a manageable horror, a local ghost story. But this man, this quiet teacher, whose very presence could reorder reality and bankrupt a town, he was an unmanageable grace. He was a danger to the way things were. And so, A new kind of begging began on that shore. The man who had been healed, seeing that the teacher was preparing to leave, fell at his feet. He begged him that he might be with him. It was the plea of a rescued soul, desiring not another gift, but the giver himself. But the people of the town, their faces hard with fear and resentment, came forward with their own petition. They too began to beg Jesus. They begged him to depart from their region. 2 beggars stood on that shore. One, delivered from hell, begged for communion. The others, comfortable in their own quiet tombs of commerce and order, begged for absence. The Lord, who commands legions but will not force a human heart, granted their request. He turned from them and stepped back into the boat. The great tragedy of the Gerasenes was not that they rejected the Son of God, but that he honored their choice. As the boat pushed off, the delivered man made to follow, his heart breaking. But the teacher stopped him. "Go home to your friends," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." He was denied the comfort of following, but he was given the honor of being a witness. His mission field was the very place of his ruin. His sermon was to be his own scars, and so the boat sailed away, leaving behind one sane man in a country of the mad. The man who was once a walking graveyard had become a living sermon, and he went into the towns, that region of 10 cities, and began to proclaim the name of the one who had given him his own name back. And all who heard him marveled, for they had asked the message to leave, but he had left behind a message in flesh and blood that they could never, ever ignore. Selah.